Hey there, welcome to another episode of Cartridges and Casings, a whiplash of a military history show. Today I have on Luca Kaiser from Kaiser's History. Great YouTube channel. Please go check it out. Like, comment, subscribe. Everything that we're covering today, he covers in much better depth and with great graphics and information. So, great channel. Go check it out. And
Thanks for
let
the
us
call out.
start. Now you're welcome. Luca Kaiser. Would America
Yes.
have won the American Revolutionary War without the French?
So that's a good starting question, and I must say this is like a question that has conflicting views. Basically, the historian I've studied the most when it comes to my video series also is Jonathan Ardal, and he goes through he apparently spoke French very well, and he went through all the French archives and everything. And what he says is absolutely there's no shot America would have won without France. France ended up paying 1.3 billion livres for the war, which is like upwards to 30 billion US dollar today. Doesn't really sound much when you look at, I don't know, America's debt, for example, today, but it used to be a lot of money back then because of how economies worked back then. So it's a massive investment they make into the American war, and even with that investment, the British actually nearly win at many points, and also the Spanish also contribute a lot of their own money and also get themselves into quite a lot of financial trouble and fight a lot of battles with the British and all over the globe. And basically, they without all of that, I don't think there is much of a chance. And also, so do think other historians like Jonathan Ardal, Pierce Maxey. There's more modern historians who take a middle approach. They say, well, the war would have been not entirely won by the British, even if the Americans, if the French wouldn't have intervened, but the status quo before the war would have not have been restored. And with that, I think I agree, because I don't think even I think I strongly believe that if the French didn't intervene, America gets defeated militarily, but it doesn't really mean that the status quo before the war returns. And so yeah, and I base this also on troop numbers, which are very well documented. So during the war, the British Army swells up to 50 to 80,000 men operating all over the globe. So they fight the Spanish in Gibraltar, they fight the French and the Dutch in India, they fight the Spanish and French in the Caribbean, and also in European waters, they defend Britain from an invasion from France and Spain. So yeah, they have this army fighting all over the world, but if they manage to mobilize this all on into America, and without the Bourbon powers, or Bourbon being the dynasty that ruled France and Spain during that time, if they don't have to fight them, they can pour all of those resources into America. And how long the British actually keep fighting kind of shows to me that the political will to do that was actually there. And so I believe militarily, the 15 to 20,000 American troops that were in the field in 1779, that's the time when both powers, Spain and France, intervene, help the Americans. The Americans have like 15, 20,000 troops in the field, and the British regular army alone has about 50,000 men. Then they hire 18,000 Hessians, and together with other German troops from other German states, they get up to 30,000 auxiliary troops, and that's basically odds that are massively stacked against the Americans. So if the French and the Spanish do not intervene by 1779, I believe the game is militarily up for General Washington. So that's what I firmly believe. So yeah.
Oh, I know it's going to be a fascinating topic, because this is one thing that I love talking about is the European involvement and how the French came in, and also the Spanish, more so the French. But I don't want to upset any Spaniards. I know they love to show up in the comment section. So to talk about France of the American Revolutionary War, we have to kind of talk about the previous war, correct? That would be the 7 Years' War. So let's start with that.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, correct.
What is the seven? what is the loss, or I guess let's cover the 7 Years' War and why does that have such an impact on the French's decision?
So the French get in 1756. By that war, they are already fighting a border conflict with the British since 1754. You see on this map that Luke has put up on his screen is they basically have a very, very big empire in North America that covers most of the modern American Midwest and most of Canada, basically. So they have this ginormous empire, and they have been fighting border wars with the 13 colonies, which is the eastern, or the original 13 states of the United States, the eastern states, which were British colonies at the time, and they were fighting a border war for 2 years since 1754 by that time already. And by 1756, they get attacked by the British Navy when reinforcing their colonies. And this starts a war that is global, just as the American Revolution would end up being. So to cut a very long story short, Britain and Prussia ally. So Prussia being the premier power in Germany, or not yet premier power, a smaller power in Germany at that time. And France allies Austria, the much, much bigger power in Germany during that time. And the war basically concludes in an absolute British and Prussian victory over the Austrians and the French. And 1 year that is very important for the British and for the French is the year 1759, in which the British lose 3 key battles. So the French lose 3 key battles, which is first the Battle of Quebec. I think I've put a picture of that somewhere in the files, or the Battle of the Fields of Abraham, where a British army under General James Wolfe sails up the St. Lawrence River and captures the capital of New France, the capital of this big territory. And this, in the following year, the fall of the rest of Canada seals the French fate in North America, and they basically lose their empire there. And also on the high seas, there gets a battle fought in Quiberon Bay off the coast of Brittany. You have also got a picture of there. And in this battle, the French Navy gets almost entirely destroyed. So they lose a lot of their ships. It's basically a done deal for the French Navy at this point. And also on the European continent, the British supports various German states in a fight against France. Also, the British King, George II, and later George III, they are also the Elector of Hanover, which is a German statelet, and they have interest in Germany then also, and they raise an army that's composed of Germans and British, and they defeat the French decisively during that same year at 1759 at the Battle of Minden. And so they got a triple victory. They won in Europe, they won at the high seas, and they won in North America. And this is like a total, utter collapse for the French. Also in North America, as you can see, the borders in the 1763 Treaty of Paris get completely redrawn. So this Midwestern part partially goes to the British nominally. Actually, nobody, most of the people that live there at this time are Native Americans. They're not white settlers of any kind. And the eastern part of that goes to Spain in a kind of deal to kind of prevent this from falling to the hands of the British. And the British gain Florida, and all of the French Empire in North America gets lost. So yeah, this is absolutely a strategic disaster, as you've asked. So it's a disaster in Europe, it's a disaster at sea, it's a disaster in North America. So yeah.
Yeah, it's just interesting to look at the before and then the after. That is just, and we have to take into account this is what, hundreds of years of settlement, hundreds of years of the French crown pouring money in, pouring settlers, colonizing that part of the the continent. Now it's just gone like that. And they've already fought multiple wars between each other, but the other ones hadn't been as catastrophic for the French as this one was. So
exactly.
So what what did France actually lose in 1763, and what mattered the most to the French?
So, as I've already mentioned, the North American colonies obviously were one of the biggest losses, and they also suffered losses all over the world. At this time, there are other colonies in parts of the world that are very important, actually much more important than North America. As you said, they have settled these lands for quite a long time at this point, but they haven't actually managed to convince a lot of French people to go over there to actually live in these places, because it's a very inhospitable land. It's not like the Spanish going into Mexico in the 16th century, where they have a functioning empire they can just conquer, plant their flag on. It's not going to work there, because it's a vast expanse of wilderness, and so they don't really fight for this territory that much on the peace table. So what they actually lose is, apart from that, is India. So the French have a big interest in India before the war, which also gets basically removed. They keep their major port in India, which is Pondicherry, but they cannot fortify it. They cannot station troops there. And the French allies in these fields are basically left out to dry, and the British take over India over the rest of the century. So that's a big loss for the French. Another big loss is some Caribbean sugar islands. So sugar is an immensely important resource in the 18th century, which sells for a lot on European markets, and that's much more important than these vast expanses of land in North America. So the islands they lose are Dominica, Tobago, and St. Vincent, but they get their most important island returned to them, which is Martinique, which is actually captured by the British under a very colorful figure called Admiral Rodney. So I will do a video about him also soon. But he's a very important admiral in the war, in the American war later. So that island gets returned, Martinique, to the French, and yeah, they also give away part of their North American colonies for that, basically. So that's very important to them. And so what in America they do actually keep are two islands of the island of Newfoundland. So this is like this big island on the top right of this map you can see there. Two islands off that big island are Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon. These are fishing stations, because the French Navy actually at this point relies very much on the fishing fleet of Newfoundland, because they do cod fishing there, and they employ upwards to 20,000 sailors, French sailors. And the big problem for France is they're not a maritime power, nearly as much to the same degree as the British are. And they basically need these 20,000 sailors to be constantly trained, to be constantly at sea, to be then drafted into the French Navy. So they basically retain that at the peace table, which is actually much more important as the rest of the empire, even though these places look very small on the map. So yeah, and also a British commissioner gets stationed at the European port of Dunkirk, which is actually the port that's closest to the British mainland, from which you can, for example, attack Britain herself, basically. And the British commissioner is there to see if this Dunkirk port is not fortified. So that's his job. And so yeah, it's not looking great for the French. But as I said, the losses aren't actually that terrible if you think about it. So because this North American empire costs more to maintain than it actually brings in terms of taxes and tariffs, because not a lot of white people live there. It's a vast expanse of land, and basically they manage to retain the most important things. So yeah, that's the thing with 1760.
So the British were able to have inspectors in Dunkirk just to make sure the French wouldn't refortify. Like, that's just got to be, embarrassing, and it's got to hurt the honor of the French. I'm sure that also would factor in.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a big dishonor, and also a lot of people in Versailles, many of them having like diplomatic background, serving in the Foreign Office in certain countries, one of whom later Vergennes would play a very, very important role in the American Revolution. They think that the defeat is not really that much of a economical or territorial disaster, as much as it is a diplomatic disaster, actually.
Yeah, because sorry.
Yeah.
By the end of the 7 Years' War, there's no British, German armies really marching into France herself, right? Like, they've lost the colonies, but like on the continent, it's not like when we think modern war or total war, you march on the capital, you throw it out. That doesn't happen in the 7 Years' War. It basically ends on the table. Land is given away. So something interesting to think about.
It actually nearly happens. That's also the thing, because that army that wins the Battle of Minden actually threatens to cross the Rhine. And when the colonial governor of New France asked the French for the Versailles for more troops, he actually said, "Well, if your house is on fire, you're not going to look at the stables, right?" So that was a thing. So they were actually threatening France herself in the 7 Years' War. So, but yeah.
Was the loss of Canada and India more economic or strategic? How important were these two outposts?
So India was definitely economic. Canada was more strategic. So it's because, as I said, like this didn't get much money for the French, all of these territories. But for example, in the hurricane season in the Caribbean, where the French still held a lot of territory, they could basically shelter their ships from hurricane season and sail up north to Canada. They couldn't do that anymore after that. So that's the strategic aspect of that, which I think is bigger. So yeah. Yep.
Okay, so what was the economic impact for the loss of the 7 Years' War on France then?
So yeah, it basically boils down more to debt they rack up, and so the biggest issue basically is that France in the interwar period doesn't manage to reform its economic system. It's very archaic at this point, and also the tax system is a myriad of new administrative laws introduced by Louis XIV in the 17th century. It's also some provinces have certain tax privileges that are from medieval times, basically, and also the estates don't get taxed at times, like some of the estates, like the clergy and the nobility. So basically, the biggest problem that France faces is modernization after the war. It's less so the international situation France has to solve after the war. It's more the economic or modernization question. So, yeah.
When we talk about privileges, I think it's manufacturing the revolution or something about the revolution. It follows Saint-Étienne. When we talk about privileges for tax purposes, I didn't realize that certain towns would like have in their charter they don't pay tax, and it was given to them hundreds of years ago by a king. So imagine you show up, you're now the king, and then you just have little ink spots of towns in your country that you can't tax at, or maybe you can tax them a little bit. I don't quite know, but if you want to kind of, if you have the information, we want to talk about the privileges aspects just real quick, because I find that stuff fascinating. Because we're told that like France has a very outdated tax system, but to realize that certain people are not paying taxes at all due to their station and to royal charters is just crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So as I said, the clergy and the nobility don't pay taxes at all. And the clergy especially is a landholder, a very, very big landholder. And so what people get actually wrong about France during that time is they think it is like this aristocratic backwater where the nobility basically whips their peasants around. But this is not the case. Like It has modernized, but in a different way than Britain. Britain basically modernized into what we could today call a modern liberal economy, where like a lot of people have a lot of business freedoms, where there are no internal trade barriers, where, for example, trades are not gate kept by guilds and stuff like that. So they have a liberal economy. What France does instead, they try to micromanage society and economy centrally. So they, for example, the Royal Council gives out recommendations on how peasants should plant their fields and all of that stuff. And there are royal intendants in the provinces enforcing the will of the central council. So they make some decisions that are sometimes nonsensical, and they have their royal intendants in the provinces just enforcing that. And at the same time, like this modern aspects that would appear totalitarian to us today, there is this old aspect of old privileges and myriad of tax exceptions for provinces or towns. And the nobility in this whole construct doesn't really have any function anymore. Like it's in other countries, for example, in Russia or in Germany or something, the nobility actually lives on the land. They do their administrative duties, and but also the peasants have much more of obligations, and which they do not in France. In France, basically, the royal intendant governs the country, and the seigneur or the nobility is just a useless class of people that just get money from the land, but they don't steward it. They live in the city, they live in Versailles, and they party all the time, but they don't. And this is and France is actually the country with the highest amount of landowners in Europe at this point. So I recommend Alexis de Tocqueville on this. It's a little bit older, and I know like about, or maybe you can read other stuff that's related to that. He wrote in the 19th century, but he pretty much very well explains how the Ancien Regime economy worked. And it was like this, as I said, like to sum up, it's this myriad of totalitarian modernization on one hand and ancient privilege on the other. And that's this economic problem that France has, basically. So yeah, I hope that wasn't too extensive.
Oh no, we're here for extensive. And Hardy Hat, I see your comments. Just a quick update for everybody. We're having Luca Kaiser on from Kaiser's History. Go like, comment, subscribe to his channel. And if you have any questions for our guests today, leave them in the comment section. Once we get through our show, I'll come back and I'll field the questions. So you're not alone out there, Hardy. And we'll talk more about the Army later on and the reorganization and the special regiments the show regiments. But all right, so the 7 Years' War is a complete disaster. Well, it's not great, right?
Yeah.
How much of this loss in the 7 Years' War creates a long-term desire for revenge versus a need to restore balance?
So the thing is, with the desire for revenge, that more centers on the nobility and on public opinion, which is not actually that important in the Ancien Regime France, because all the decisions are made in Versailles, and a lot of these Enlightenment figures do their decisions there. And yeah, of course, public opinion is very aggravated, and also the army officers are very disgruntled. They try to have a revenge war. They lobby the government, and also the prime minister in all but name. I always have to say that because in France there was technically no prime minister, but there were ministers acting basically as prime ministers, who took this position after the war was a guy called Duc de Choiseul, and he basically managed to. His agenda was basically to have a revenge war. So he wanted revenge. He wanted to get rid of the stain of dishonor, as you may call it. And he goes about rebuilding the navy, which, as I said, was completely destroyed in 1759 at the Battle of Quiberon Bay. And he basically goes on a resupplies shopping spree all over Europe, buying naval supplies, stocking the dockyards, by building new ships, and so yeah, this all he basically does all of this unbeknownst to the king, who, or not unbeknownst, but basically with an agenda that was not really the king's agenda. The king at this time was Louis XV, grandfather of Louis XVI, the guy that got made a few inches shorter by a blade later in the French Revolution. So this Choiseul guy basically tries to get this revenge war, and he sees this opportunity in 1770 when I think I've also got a graphic there. When the Spanish get into trouble, Spain is a ally of France since 1760, where the family compact was made, or family compact, because, as I mentioned before, France and Spain are governed by the same royal dynasty. They are an ally of France, and they get into trouble over the Falkland Islands because, according to the Spaniards, that's part of Argentina, or the viceroyalty of Rio de la Plata, which is a Spanish colony at this time. And they get into trouble with the British over that because they built settlements there, in their eyes, illegally. And so yeah, and Spain is France's ally, and Choiseul thinks, oh great, let's have a revenge war. And also Choiseul keeps up a spy network in the 13 colonies, or what later becomes the US, and to report back on discontent there, to maybe also sow discontent. So there's also a lot of 17th century, 18th century intelligence going on there. And so yeah, he has this crisis in 1770. He sees his chance to start a war, and then Louis XV discovers that he did all of this naval buildup just to start a war. And Louis XV is very angry about this because he has spent all of his life fighting wars that are disastrous for him, and he doesn't want this. And he says, what have you been doing? You have been starting these tensions all the time. You are basically useless. I want you gone. And then he kicks him out, and their crisis resolves. And yeah, so that's the situation then after 1770, 1771. And yeah, so after that, Louis XV, in his final years until 1774, when he dies, the navy and everything Choiseul has built up falls into disrepair. There's no money anymore for the navy. All ships get mothballed. A guy takes over the navy who is quite insane, actually. He does some stupid naval administrative reforms that completely wreck the navy. And so by the time of 1774, the king dies. There are only 34 ships of the line. Ships of the line are basically these big men of wars, these bigger ships you would have, warships at the time. You have only 34 of them operate in an operational state, and on paper, basically, or not even that. And none of them are crewed. All of the ports are depopulated. Nobody cares about the navy anymore. And yeah, so there's that.
Yeah, it's always interesting to talk about the industrial output of even the Ancien regime, because we have some images here. Because under Choiseul, there's also the modernization, I guess, in a way. You could talk about their long arms. So this is a model 1728. Go.
So under his regime, basically, obviously his focus is mainly on the navy, because he wants to get revenge from Britain, and Britain is a naval power, not a land power. But the army also gets reformed. So we get the 1763 model of the Charleville musket. Before that, we had the 1817. I forgot the date. The other model where you're showing right now, with a cow foot at the back. And it was much lighter than the 1763 model, this one. And so the 1763 model basically focused on sturdiness, on being heavier. They also made it shorter, so it's easier to handle. But yeah, and also all the parts are made heavier. Also the rings are made heavier. There's this spring inserted for the ramrod. And yeah, this model gets modified until the American Revolutionary War, where of course these muskets get used a lot. They get modified over time, but I don't know, maybe you can elaborate more about that, because I, as of now, don't own a musket yet, but I think you are more of an expert on the Charleville. So
I'm just a guy with a YouTube channel, but I will absolutely talk about the modernization from 1763 to 77 real quick. Basically, what happens at the end of the war, hundreds of thousands of guns are lost. The French, I think, maintain an army of a couple 100,000 during the war. They field a lot of men. They have a lot of men in arms. 1763 comes out. Yeah, okay, 170. 1763, the Duc de Choiseul, he tells his armories to manufacture a new model of musket. That becomes the model of 1763. It's supposed to be the lighter, more durable gun, and it turns out to be heavier. So he puts in charge one of the inspectors at the Royal Armory. That would be Montbéliard. He's at Saint-Étienne, and he designs what we're looking at right now, which is the 1766. And then, like what you said, they basically modernize. They change locations of barrel bands and bayonet lugs. They lighten the barrel. They lighten the stock, and they make, I think it's like 400,000 of these types, these models of 1763, 66, all the way to the late 1760s. But just to think about, like, that is so much production for the 18th century. So that number always blows me away. And then 100,000 of them get sent to the United States during the Revolution. But yeah, so France has this ability to mass arms, mass men, mass armies, everything else like that. But I have a whole channel basically dedicated to French muskets, and we can talk about that another one. And we gotta get you one. All right, so what's the next? We have a picture up here of the de Roy infantry.
Yeah, so also uniforms changed. Also something I wanted to show as a reenactor myself. So uniforms during the 7 Years' War looked like this, Baroque style uniforms. They don't have these facings here. They're heavy. They have a lot of stuff around the arms and everything. So they're completely different. They're also longer. And later on, I've also made a picture at the Ticonderoga Museum of a uniform that was later used. It's much more modern, so they go full into modernization. This is a original uniform actually from the Battle of Yorktown from a French grenadier. So you see how a lot of this overbearing big coat gets reduced to this very slim and practical new uniform that gets created. So a lot of these aspects of the army also get reformed. Yeah.
Are the French infantry still carrying, or the regular, I think they're fusiliers, are they still carrying swords by the time of the Revolution? Because that's a 7 Years' War thing, right? Or am I getting this confused?
Actually, I don't know that. I would have to look that up if they keep their swords. I know more about the Germans. They do keep it, but I don't know if the French do. Because yeah.
Another picture I want to throw up real quick is de Gouverville. He is reworking the artillery, and this might actually not be his standard, but he standardizes artillery as well, artillery carriages. So it's like a all-encompassing reorganization, modernization, cleaning up of the French military. And yeah, there's just so much.
So it's also the battalion guns, so like much lighter, much more mobile. So a lot of these, like in situ, you can have a lot more guns at the front line canistering the enemy line when you're advanced. So that's a major effect of that. But it comes more into play, I believe, in the later wars, Revolutionary Wars and Napoleonic Wars, because the army doesn't really have that much. So it's not really as important in the American Revolutionary War. It's more the Navy that is really important there. So, yeah.
Okay. So are the French kind of borrowing are they kind of copying from the British Navy? I don't want to really get off our outline, but they're kind of, from what I've read, they kind of look towards the Prussians as like we want to kind of model more like them as an army? Are they trying to model their navy more like, or are they just trying to, hey, we can just invest more into our navy because that was a strategic, that was a weakness in our, obviously, like you got to win naval fights.
No, they do not actually. The Royal Navy at this point is a very meritocratic institution. French Navy is not. So you have to be noble, you have to be made a captain at Versailles. So it's a much less meritocratic, less professional organization as the British Royal Navy, and they don't actually adapt that. It's too hard to do, basically. So yeah, also societal wise. So the society is, as I've explained before, the French society is much more antiquated when it comes to that. So you can't really have this sort of meritocratic system yet. So yeah.
So are we seeing a shift to a more modern, efficient army, or is there, what are the kind of changes going on as well?
So yeah, absolutely. Like as we've discussed, also the reglement gets changed. A lot of the old stuff that was not very efficient in the 7 Years' War gets removed. A lot of old drills and everything. Also, the powder quality gets standardized, which is very, very helpful and very important. So anybody who reenacts can relate to that. So yeah.
So let's introduce one of the more entertaining characters of history. Who is Pierre Beaumarchais?
So I would actually come back to him later because he doesn't play.
Okay.
He doesn't at this point when the king gets crowned, he doesn't really play that much of a role. So yeah. So just to snap back,
So
we're in 1775 when the old king's dead, new king comes in. So yeah.
Okay. So that is that this guy right here, or is this the old king?
So no, this is actually the new king. So the old king is very, very different in temperament to the new king. The new king is a very, very tender-hearted, fine-spirited, but also very weak and sort of not very confrontative character, to put it like that. So he doesn't want any trouble. He wants to be everybody's friend. At the same time, he fails to be everybody's friend, but he tries. He's a family man, other than his grandfather. He loves his wife, Marie Antoinette, and who's an Austrian princess. And he, for example, doesn't get a mistress. So he's also very much into locks. He's not a big power player or anything. He many times doesn't notice what's even happening at Versailles, which is quite notable. So a lot of these ministers kind of play him like a fiddle, to say it like that. He doesn't really get a lot of these things that are going on. And also he's very much not a guy who would start a war. That's also very important in the context of this American revolutionary thing. He's not the guy who would assert himself or risk a lot by going to war. So he's a very, very meek character, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, so who are the key decision makers inside the Versailles and the cabinet?
So yeah, we have just established that Louis XVI was definitely not the key decision maker. So the most important minister at this time is Maurepas, or Jean-Philippe Philippot de Maurepas, who is the closest advisor. He is a holdover from the previous regime, but he has already, before the coronation, endeared himself to Louis XVI, and he is like the closest advisor, and he's there for his psychological support and basically advises him on most things. He's the most important guy. Then there is a new minister he appoints is Vergennes. He's a career diplomat. He has served as ambassador to the Ottoman court, to the Swedish court, and he has served in the diplomatic corps since he was a young man. So all he cares about is diplomacy, basically. And another important minister is Turgot. He is a reformer, a very Enlightenment thinker. He wants to get rid of this system I've just described before, of these myriad of different tax exemptions and all of this these problems, economic problems that France had during that time. So he wants to reform that. And yeah, so these are the three most important characters at the time. And what's striking is that they are not in favor of war. So the king is not in favor of war, obviously, because he's like this meek character. He likes making clocks. He's into mechanics. He's into all of that stuff, but he's not this confrontative, assertive man. Then there's Maurepas, this old guy. He's like over 90 years old during that time. Over 80 years old, and he's basically wants to retain his position. He's comfortable in his position. He doesn't want to risk everything by going to war. Turgot, this big reformer, he wants to reform the country, so a war doesn't really help with that. And Vergennes, more interesting, basically he wants to establish a system of a balance of power. So that's his main agenda. So just to sum up the situation. So a war is not very likely during that time. So if you ask somebody in 1775, will France go to war with Britain soon? They would probably say no, not at all. So doesn't make much sense. So yeah.
Okay, so then we have on here the what changes under Vergennes. So what changes then? What leads to the change in perspective from the council and the king?
So yeah, basically the navy, which is very important for obviously fighting a war with Britain, which is not very likely during that time, is in disrepair. He appoints a new guy to this position, who's Antoine de Sartine, who's the former police chief of Paris, and he rolls back a lot of these reforms. He also lobbies the king for getting more money for the navy. So basically, his mission is to get more money, to improve the importance of his department, and to advance, basically. So yeah, and as I say, it is not very likely that they go to war. Also, the main deterrent, so this 170,000 men figure, I've thrown out before. So this is the peacetime army of the French during that time. So it's a very, very big army, and this is the main deterrent. So also the new king is not really that inclined to waste that much money on the navy either. So yeah, that's it.
All right. So we have so I guess the next part would be like, who are we looking? Is this the Secretary of the Navy or I guess the Minister of the Navy would be the proper term? Antoine de Sartine?
Yeah, exactly. That's him. So that's the new naval minister, former chief constable of Paris, and yeah, he goes about presenting a new plan of the navy. He wants a lot of new ships, but strangely disregards to build a lot of these 3-decker ships, or these 3-deck big ships that have 3 decks of guns, which a decision which will come to bite the French in the war later. And he basically oversees the rebuilding of the navy during that time. So yeah.
Okay, so we're looking at one of the 3-decker ships. Why did they chose to go with more 2-deckers for cruising, patrolling? Were they still planning on doing major ship-on-shipping, like lines of battle that we were kind of used to, or?
Yeah, they were. So they were building ships of the line. So the plan he laid out was 8 80-gun ships of the line. These are 24 74, 24 64, 8 50, and 8 50-gun. So you see the symmetry. So 8 24 24 8. So he was basically a bureaucrat, and maybe it was just his desire for symmetry. It's a bit of a mystery why he disregarded building the first rates. But this ship you're just showing right there is the Bretagne, which is a first rate that was already built before. So he goes about getting those ships back into line, like the Ville de Paris or the Bretagne. But he completely disregards building any 3-deckers. So it's still a mystery why he does that, but yeah. So maybe it's just his bureaucratic concern for symmetry.
It all works out in the end. So we're in 1775, 1776. Why does France end up going to war then in the spring of 1776?
So yeah, they go to war. The big shift actually comes later. What they do first is the American Revolution breaks out 2 months before the king is crowned. The battles of Lexington and Concord happen in 1775, and the French react with just what they call the just and precise conduct. So they just send a token reinforcement to Martinique of 3 corvettes, 3 frigates, and 6 battalions of troops they send to Martinique, but that's it. So they don't really plan a war at this stage, really. And the first impulse to kind of change that comes from the ambassador to London, who's called Guin. And he suggests in August to Vergennes that he should send an agent over to the Americans to kind of know what they're up to. So maybe there's an opportunity there. He goes to Vergennes. Vergennes sends this guy over without the knowledge or consent of the king, I might add. So he sends this guy over. He does a secret diplomacy. He meets in December of 1775 with a secret committee of the Continental Congress, and he basically and the Americans want 2 things from the French. They want the right to trade for arms and supplies in the ports of the French Empire, and they want American engineers to join the American army because they don't have a lot of these professionalized soldiers yet. So they kind of want that. So, and Bonvola goes back to France, and Vergennes says, "Oh, this is brilliant. So I'll just go to this guy who's a propagandist and a playwright, who's called Boucharmat, very colorful figure. I don't know if you've seen the movie Barry Lyndon, but he would be kind of the real life equivalent to that. So kind of this charlatan figure, kind of an upstart, marries rich women, which mysteriously die later. Then he tries to get to Spain, tries to get the permit to trade slaves there, and tries to get his sister married to some Spanish duke and stuff. So he's a very, Barry Lyndon-like figure, I might add. So yeah, this guy, he writes a memoir for Vergennes, advocating for the king to accept the demands of the French. And obviously, him being a playwright, he's very eloquent, and so this makes quite the impression on the king. So yeah.
Wasn't he like also an actor? Oh, hey, Garrett from Smoke in the Woods. I think he's also like an actor. He seems like such a colorful character. Whenever you look into Beaumarchais, he's just like, what is? He's like a court. He's like you said earlier. He's fun. He looks like a fun time. You'd want to drink a beer with him.
Absolutely. So yeah, he writes this memoir for the king in his usually eloquent style. He also would go on later to write the Romance of Figaro, very important thing for the French Revolution. So if you want to look that up, just feel free to do that. And so this guy writes this memoir, and the king basically calls a council as a reaction to that. But when I refer to the council, I don't mean the entire council. Council is basically the entire governing body of France. I just mean the inner council, basically the council within the council, which consists of Maurepas, Sartine, Vergennes, and the Comte de Saint-Germain, who's the army minister. So they all meet in Paris and at Versailles, and to discuss these demands. And Vergennes brings a document with him, which is one of the most important documents actually of the American Revolution, I would say, because he basically puts forth why he thinks it's a good idea to support the American Revolution covertly, or to give them to buy them weapons, basically paid for by the king. And yeah, what he basically says as for reasons of why the king should do that, he puts out that, well, the British are mobilizing their navies, they're mobilizing their armies. Whenever they're done with the Americans, they will probably come down bearing down on us or the Spanish, and that's going to be, we're not going to have a good time. That's his main argument. So yeah, that he presents at this meeting, and the king listens to that and gives a 3 weeks break to decide whether for the other members of the council to basically formulate their responses, if this is a good idea or not. So yeah, this happens.
All right. Why is the king so out of the loop on a lot of this? He is finding some of this stuff out after it happens. Or is he literally, like you say, he's just a clockmaker and he's just not too interested in managing, I guess, in a way?
He is interested, but he is just not very assertive, and he's not very good at also being respected also by his ministers, I might say. This is also so he is basically he's also getting deceived a lot by Vergennes, because when looking at what Vergennes writes in his memoir is he fears an attack from Britain, and at this point all the emissaries in London basically know that this is not going to happen. Lord North government is very much conciliatory. They don't want to waste money on a war. Also, war is bad for the economy. Parliament is dominated by people who own stocks. They don't want their stock portfolios to crash when a war starts. They don't want any of this. They don't want to spend billions upon billions of pounds on the navy. So basically all people know that the political will to go to war with France is just not there. And also the main advocate for a more harsh stance towards France, who is at this point William Pitt the Elder, is out of politics. He's not in power anymore. And yeah, and also the British army at this point, I've mentioned the French army had 170,000 men as a peacetime army. The British had less than 20,000 globally dispersed men. And so they were not really in a position to attack the Bourbon empires, that's being Spain and France during that time. And basically Vergennes knows that. So he knows it, and yeah, he basically makes up something to deceive the king. So that's what he does, and the king eats it. He takes it. So that's a thing.
He's fed bad intelligence from his court. Funny how that works. So France is going to the American Revolution starts in April 1775. It's also important to note that when the revolution starts, the colonists don't declare independence until a year later. So at the beginning, it could just be, a civil war, quick and done, and then everything will be good. So at this time, when France is seeing that the revolution is starting, even on the American the Patriot side, they haven't came down like, we want to completely separate from the king and from the mother country. Actually, a lot of the reason the Patriots are fighting is they want their rights as Englishmen to be respected. It's not no taxation, no representation. It's no taxation without representation. We're Americans. We should be getting equal rights in the law. So let's kind of talk about how does France. So they don't openly support in 1775. But how does France start to support the Patriot cause, the Americans, the rebels? If you want to talk about our famous Roderigue, Hortalez and Company.
So yeah, that only comes into place after a big court drama, which takes place after this 3 weeks of time they have between this first meeting of the Inner Council and the second meeting. So in this interlude, basically, Maurepas, as I've said, he is the most important minister, and in that what he says is more important to the king than anyone else of these people. And what he basically does is he is very much pissed off by the reforms Turgot wants to implement or has already implemented, because he has, before this whole ordeal, Turgot has implemented the so-called 6 edicts abolishing the corvée, which is the forced labor system for peasants, And he also abolished guilds in Paris. And so a lot of people on the streets of Paris are actually on the side of Maurepas, and they're against modernization because modernization goes against their political interests or economic interests. So a lot of these craftsmen, for example, they don't like that Turgot wants to remove all the tariffs that protect them, sometimes even from producers of other regions. So they're internal tariffs. He doesn't want Turgot to dissolve the guilds, which are basically mechanisms to gatekeep the knowledge of the artisans. So they don't want any of that. Also, the nobles are pissed because they got taken away their Covert, so the forced labor system. So public opinion turns decidedly against Turgot during that time. And Turgot, obviously, with his reform plan, is very much anti-war. So he's absolutely against anything that Vergennes puts out there. And Maurepas is, but because of these reforms and how much actually they get done, is frightened that Turgot is going to take his place at the king's as a king's right-hand man. And he opportunistically, not because he disapproves with Turgot's agenda, but just because he's frightened of him, outshining him, basically, he sides with Vergennes and public opinion against Turgot, against reform, against modernization, which I've mentioned is the most important thing France actually needs to do during that time. So he basically poisons the ear of the king. It's again another example of the king being played like a fiddle. He doesn't really know what's going on. Maurepas says, "Oh, look at these people, they're all angry now, and they're angry at you, the king, because of this crazy madman, Turgot." He starts a personal smearing campaign against Turgot. He distributes pamphlets ridiculing Turgot as like this guy who doesn't have any fun. He's just this Enlightenment guy who's just sitting at desks planning out crazy stuff and crazy reforms, and he's like pedantic and this soulless, funless individual, basically a nerd. He's calling him a nerd is what he's doing. So so he smears him, and so the second meeting is already kind of tainted by this, and the king is kind of already tilted towards Maurepas and Vergennes' agenda of supporting the Americans. And he's already tilted towards that side. And then a second set of documents come in, the so-called reflections. These are the memoirs they prepare for the second meeting. And during this, so now they have all the backing of the public opinion of basically everyone in France, and they, like the pro-war party, comes out much stronger. Than they don't say, "Oh, the American war is a danger for us." They say it is an opportunity. We can get something from this. And so they say, let's get some more islands, sugar islands. Let's get some more. Let's get more ports for our fishing fleet. Let's get rid of this commissioner in Dunkirk. Let's get rid of all of that nonsense. And so now they are basically bold enough to say what they really want. They want a war, and it's not a necessary war at this stage. They just want it, and they kind of become honest about that. And as I said, like the king's already tilted towards the pro-war camp, so he goes with them. He kicks out Turgot, he fires him, and basically, that's removes any friction from within the court in Versailles. The new three guys in charge are Maurepas, obviously still, because he just got rid of his rival. Vergennes now, because his agenda gets executed. And Sartine, because he's a Navy guy, so, and for a course of hostility against Britain, you need the Navy, so the Navy guy is also important. So these three guys are then in charge of France and very, very, very coherently guide France through the war against Britain, through all these wars. So they have much more coherence than the British government has, which is still, during the war, a lot of the times fighting with each other. And France doesn't have that. They have like one goal. They want to defeat Britain. That's the thing. So, yeah.
Okay, so the palace intrigue all comes together. All of the counselors are on the same page now, with the king supporting. So they make that decision. The king makes the decision to support the American cause. And do you want to talk about or do you want to go straight into the Navy rebuild of 76 or the naval
aspect? The first aspect is covert support. So Vergennes actually, although he says, he says to the king basically, oh, there is an imminent attack of Britain and whatever, he knows that it's not true. And also the Navy guy, Sartine, that you're showing right now, doesn't know that. What they go ahead doing is, instead of preparing for the supposed attack, they prepare arms shipments for the Americans. And so they start setting up with this figure we've talked about before, Beaumarchais. So with his support, basically, they set up this Hortalez company. I forgot the name. Hortalez something company.
Roderigue Hortalez and Company. It's a Spanish name, which I always finds funny, and it's ran out of it's ran out of a hotel in Paris.
So yeah, basically what they do is they set up fake contracts that they've bought all of this equipment, and they send this real life version of Barry Lyndon to basically run this company, to run this arms smuggling operation. And according to him himself, basically, he has, until 1776, he has smuggled 20,000 muskets to America, and a bunch of 4-pounder guns and loads and loads of powder. Is what he sends already then. So yeah.
And it's fun. It's to kind of build off that. So the arsenals in France are just losing military grade weapons. They're ending up on these ships that go to the Caribbean. I think they're actually sent to the Dutch islands down there, and the Americans are going down and picking up French arms. And the British, the British aren't stupid. They're just like, how are all these French military arms finding their ways into the rebels' hands? It's kind of like how modern politics works in a bit. It's like, I have no idea, man. They just can't hold on to them.
Actually, a lot of British merchants take part in this trade. This is very interesting. So our good old friend Admiral Rodney, I've talked about before, he's very aggravated by this, and there are very funny letters about him complaining about these people. They use the Dutch island of St. Eustatius as their base to get all of these weapons across a neutral port. And also the Dutch at St. Eustatius are the first ones to actually formally salute the American flag. So this island is a very, very bad sticking point for the British. So they really want to get rid of that. So or at least some British do. At this point, the British are still hoping to get the Dutch on their side. So that's why they know that's going on there, and they know even British merchants are implicated in this, but they can't really do much because they fear getting more European nations into this war against them. Or not yet war at this point. It's just covert support. They know it kind of, but they kind of hope that they win even despite this support, and they don't escalate into a full war. That's the hope of the British government at this point. So yeah.
Yeah, it's also interesting because the French, don't the Spanish also match the amount of money put into, like, at the beginning? Like, the French are going to front a bunch of millions of livres? I think the Spanish also match. So like early on during the covert support, there's millions of livres worth of going over. And when I did my research for some of my videos, because this actually ties into the muskets, because like how the muskets came over here, we were to provide basically like raw materials. Like we would send down grains and stuff, but we were specifically told we were specifically not going to trade over like cows and stuff like that. Like we were trying to keep certain things, because the problem was even Patriot merchantmen would rather sell cows to the French and make money and stuff like that when we needed them for on the Patriot side. All right,
yeah, so we have the same dynamic for the British side, with the British being implicated in this, or British merchants facilitating the enemy.
Hey, making a quick buck. It's a story as old as time. All right, so we have this shell company. It's just randomly gets. I mean, there's weapons are flowing in, support is flowing in. It's not just weapons. There's like gunpowder. I think like 90% of all the gunpowder given to the United States during the Revolution comes from France. So like tents, uniforms. That's in the totality. But we're still early on. So we're doing this covert support. So next part is the military and naval rebuild of 1776. And then how do you think
so it's the Navy, obviously, as I've pointed out, they have 34 ships of the line ready, sort of ish. So they are in a condition to be armed. It's what the documents say, but it's not really, because a lot of the naval stocks that this Choiseul guy has put into the stores until 1771 has been already used up. And so it's very bleak situation. And suddenly, with this new course of escalating with Britain, the dockyards are kind of caught off guard, so they don't really have that many workers or material to even build anything what Vergennes and Sartine and everybody wants. So they just keep on. They are completely surprised by this. They try to work out this, and at the end they managed to crew and man and fully mobilize 37 ships of the line. But the problem is the British have already a guard fleet, so that's a fleet that's in the Channel protecting Britain. At this point, that was raised to 35 ships of the line, and they have other ships also in America, and they have like of total ships that could be armed and crewed, they have 85 at this point. So it's not really. Vergennes knows and the French know, okay, we can support the Americans covertly, but if we go to war now, we are gonna be trounced absolutely. So so it's not really. So the naval buildup during 1776 it's more of trying to get something going, and so that only changes the year after, basically.
Is that because how I'm assuming, right? That's because the 7 Years' War ends so disastrously because of their lack of naval power at the end, and they're scared that's going to happen again. Or I don't know how much you want to kind of talk, because that aspect's interesting. I hadn't heard that before, that they were just kind of postponing until they could really rearm properly, especially the Navy.
Yeah, so they're not fearing a 1756 style attack like they had suffered in the 7 Years' War. They're not, actually, because, as I said, Vergennes professes to the king that there is this imminent danger, and the king, stupidly enough, believes it, but that's not the case. So the North government is very conciliatory. They want to keep things at arm's length, and even in 1777, which is like the next more important year for the rearmament, there's always this desire from Stromont, who's the ambassador, the British ambassador in Paris, to de-escalate the situation. They don't want any of this. They don't want France to intervene, and so that's the thing. So yeah.
So across the English Channel, how do the British react to the French armament? Because they still have that inspector in Dunkirk, right? That's actually watching the French rearm.
So they are very, very nervous. They don't really know what to do. They're not as coherently planning and Machiavel-style planning everything like the new triumvirate, as I would call it, out of these three ministers in France are doing it. They're kind of caught off guard by this, and they react nervously. So they add 15 more guard ships to the 20. So I've already mentioned 35 guard ships, which is kind of overkill, if you ask anyone. And they're already on edge because the Spanish during that time, they get attacked by Portugal, funnily enough. So in South America, Brazil is this very big colony of the Portuguese, and the rest of the modern South American countries were mainly Spanish, and they tried to wrestle control of some area which is in modern day southern Brazil. And so the Portuguese astonishingly managed to gather an army of 9,000 men to threaten the Spanish colonies. And the problem for the British is the Spanish are now mobilizing their navy. They have already 17 ships ready. And the Spanish are an ally of the French, and the Portuguese are an ally of the British. So this war escalating between those two powers kind of puts them on edge, and they're very, very nervous and trying to scramble something together. At the same time, trying to keep the French out of the war. That's kind of their reaction there in 1776. What they do in December, and this kind of changes the game a lot, is they issue a letter of marque. So this means that private ship owners can arm their ships for attacking enemy vessels, and this is very dangerous because private ship owners, obviously, or these privateers or kind of state-sponsored pirates, if you will, they don't really care who they're nominally at war with. Like, they want to make money. So it's dangerous also for the French, because whenever they send out their training squadrons, so they in 1776 and 1777 they send out a training squadron depriving the French coast of warships, and these privateers could wreak havoc there anytime. So they have to basically mobilize more ships to defend the coast whenever they're sending stuff out. And this kind of creates the need for the British to then, they are mobilizing ships, we have to mobilize too. So this spiral of escalation keeps on going then because of this letter of marque in December of 1776. So yeah.
Okay, so how does this limited intervention then turn into war? So you mentioned the letters of marque. So how are we're slowly building up, we're getting closer to actual war. So how do we actually get to the French declaring war?
So in 1777, January or early, there's only 37 ships of the line ready. And so it's not really, Vergennes knows he cannot go to war yet. And so the Navy guy, Sartine, goes out on a shopping spree of all over Europe. Basically, he buys wood from Prussia, from Russia. He buys hemp from the Baltics. He buys other naval stores from the Dutch, basically. So he goes on a shopping spree, and all of this arrives in summer of 1777. And all of this stuff basically attracts a huge amount of workers and stuff from all over France to work in the docks in Brest and Toulon and all of these ports. And they basically start on massively building up the navy. And this even reaches the extent that the ports become a tourist attraction. So wealthy people from all over Europe come to these ports to see the work going on. So it's exciting for them. Even the heir to the throne in Austria visits the port of Brest during that time incognito, which is kind of funny because Austria is also going to become at least a geopolitical adversary to France. And this would be kind of like Xi Jinping today going and visiting Okinawa or something. Would be kind of odd, but these sort of things happen in the 18th century. So he visits Brest, and so they basically manage to build up the navy quite significantly. So yeah,
that has to have been crazy. Those shipyards must have been working day in, day out, getting all these ships ready. So when does the French Navy really become strong enough to challenge the British? Are they're hitting a certain line? They're like, all right, we're at a level where we feel confident as the French to go to war.
So they only reach that in the next year. So that's a big problem for Vergennes, because actually the war is spiraling, or the escalation is spiraling out of his control. So first, this trading squadron I've mentioned before under Duchauffour leaves for the Biscay, which is this body of water between Spain and France. And what they do is they offer protection to any ship who requests it. And what ships would request protection during time of war? So it would be the American ships, because the Americans don't have a navy, and they basically offer protection to these ships. And also the British cannot no longer then search the arms shipments. And this is obviously a big problem. And incidents like, for example, one captain warns a British ship of the line off the French coast with a gunshot, and signaling to that British ship, "Oh, I will protect shipping of all flags," and also implying that he meant the American flag. And so this is a big problem. And also American privateers are also a thing. So I've just explained that the British have issued these letters of marque. The American Congress does that too. So we have a very famous American pirate who's always called the father of the American Navy, John Paul Jones. He uses French ships to sell booty, to restock his ships, and to even he uses even the ports to raid Britain itself. So he goes attack Whitehaven, which is a town in Britain, and he goes about doing all of that stuff. So always obviously not good. And also the American privateer Augustus Cunningham, he captures 18 British merchant ships, and basically he gets chased by the British into the port of Saint Malo. And at this point, so we are now in June 1777. The ambassador Stromond in Paris, so the British ambassador Stromond in Paris, he's very pissed. So he basically goes to Maurepas and to Vergennes and says, "What is this? We can't have this. Like, public opinion in Britain is already on edge. What are you doing? So you have to release these people, and you have to send all of these pirates out of your ports." And he basically forces the French to publish their orders to reject any American privateers to enter the ports. Of course, the ports commandants still keep disregarding these orders because they kind of feel now is our time for revenge. As I've mentioned at the start of this discussion, a lot of the army officers, also the port commandants and stuff, or navy officers, also they just want the revenge war. This is what they waited on for so long, and so they don't follow these orders. And so what happens in August? This causes a panic in Versailles. So the people in Versailles think, "Oh, our limited intervention is done with. We can't keep on doing this. Now is wartime, and we have started the war prematurely. We have started the war but not having our ships ready. Spain's fighting Portugal. We can't get them in either. We are done for." So they start recalling the fishing fleet from Newfoundland to get the sailors ready. They start preparing the Caribbean ports for siege battles. And so they think their game is up. But the crisis actually miraculously for the Americans, because if that happened, then France would have been destroyed and America would have lost the war in the end. So miraculously for America, basically this crisis simmers away by the 14th of September. So basically what happens is they don't escalate into open war. And but what this essentially does is inspire the king to grant even more money to the navy and to these warmongers, basically. And this basically makes the path to war even more a thing. So
it's interesting to I'm never going to say this phrase ever again in my life, but I almost feel bad for the British king, because it's the annoying clown face on, clown face off, where you have these American pirates fleeing into your arch enemy's ports to hide, to be like, "Hey, I'm just out here," that's just got to be frustrating for all sides, and all sides included. And then we talk about escalation dominance, so it's escalating on both sides. And the French are, I never really appreciated the French have prepared mentally. It sounds like they've more prepared for it, so they're boosting up their overseas territories. They're rebuilding the navy. In the American side, how I've always kind of been told, is the French were actually not really for it until they were, but it sounds like they're kind of snowballing towards this war with the enemy that they fight all the time. And the last time they fought the British, it had been a disaster for them. So it's putting more in perspective from the French side of why they don't want to go to war, but also we're on this track and there's no way getting off these tracks without a wreck, basically.
There's no way of getting off it, but also they have kind of premeditatively planned this. So as I've explained, since the point where Turgot gets removed from the cabinet and this reform path it gets beaten out in favor of the war path, it's already planned. So they know, and Vergennes especially, he's a very intelligent man other than the king. So he knows very well what's going on, and he knows where this whole ship is headed. So yeah.
All right. So the next part is the war starts without Spain. So the privateer crisis is not the point at which France goes to war. Why do the French get involved, and is it Saratoga?
So Saratoga happens in 1777, but doesn't reach Europe until December, so almost next year. The news reach Europe, but the thing is, this is not really so in American media and all of American sort of understanding. It's Saratoga happens, and this convinces the French to go into war. But as I've explained, it's not. So they've been planning for war since Turgot got removed in 1776. So they are basically, what it does is it only gives Vergennes ammunition at court to further push his war path, and also what helps actually much more for the French to decide to go away from covert support to open war is the defeats of Germantown and Brandywine during that same year, because they know they can maybe defeat one army there. And to put us into perspective, the surrender at Saratoga, 7,000 British surrender. In a European context, 7,000 is not a lot, actually. So for American battles during this time, if you compare them to European battles during the 7 Years' War, they're pretty small. And the French know the British can raise more troops from Germany, from Ireland, from all over their empire to fight in this war. And 7,000 is not going to make much of a dent in that. And so they know they have to support the Americans, otherwise they will lose. So that's the thing. And also what happens is that that by January of 1777, I have also a figure for that, comparing the navy sizes.
It's loading up here, I think.
Yep. So they managed to actually mobilize and crew 66 ships of the line, which is quite astonishing. So they've went from basically half that from the previous year to this number. And the British have in active service and crewed, they have 56 ships of the line. 19 of them are arming and not crewed yet. So they have Vergennes sees these numbers, which get reported to him by Noailles, who is the ambassador at London from Britain, and he sees these numbers and says, "Brilliant, we are strong enough." And these 19 ships would be added over the year, but at this very moment they have parity, so they can already go fight the British. So it's much more the work of these dockyards that become a tourist attraction over 1777 that the French become confident enough to go to war. So he also wants to involve the Spanish, who at this point are so he thinks they are going to join. They have 45 ships of the line because of this Portugal story. They got 45 ships of the line ready. So if you add these ships to the 66 roughly 66 French ones, you get 100 ships versus 50 to 70 ships from the British, and they could absolutely dominate. And that's what Vergennes thinks. But during that time, the Spanish are not really into that. They do not want to support America. They think that republicanism is a terrible idea. They think that Protestantism is a terrible idea. They don't want any independent American country because they own most of America is Spanish at that time. So America saying that this North and South America is Spanish at that time. So that sets a dangerous example for their colonies. And when Vergennes says, he always does, like this usual deceptive way of saying something that he doesn't mean. He says, "Oh, we just want to go to war because of Spanish interests, because of Gibraltar, because of this and that." And like the Spanish First Minister Florida Blanca gets very, very pissed by this, and he gets thrown into a rage. Rightly so, actually. So because Vergennes is doing this Machiavel thing again with him. With the Spanish, it doesn't work. So what ends up happening is that after all, they are finalizing the negotiations with the Americans, and they're meeting with Benjamin Franklin, who's at this point already in Paris. And and at the 4th of February, they formalize their Treaty of Alliance and of Amity and Commerce, which is a recognition of the American United States and is a quasi-declaration of war on the British. And so there we are.
It comes down to basically pure power then, right? So the French can actually feel they have parity, if not more, along with the Spanish allies in terms of naval forces, like you so eloquently said.
And the Spanish don't join at this point. As it's like the Spanish are very much they don't want to join. They don't want to join at all. Actually, like they hate the American thing. They don't want any of that. And the only thing they end up joining in 1778 then is just because if the French get destroyed in naval battles, that's very bad for them. So they get kind of getting forced into that. So they obviously they want something from the war. They go attack Gibraltar and all of that stuff, and they help the Americans also a great deal. Also before that, already they have always matched the French subsidies and already supplied the Americans with money mostly. But they don't want actually they want the British to win, and they state this during many times during this war. So I don't know. Yeah.
But they don't want their allies, the French, to be knocked out either. So you're kind of
exactly. They can't. They can't. If that happens, if the French get destroyed, then the Spanish are in big trouble. So they kind of after. Or this is kind of foreboding already for stuff we didn't want to cover. When in 1775 the French don't manage to win a decisive victory over the British, they're kind of forced into the war, because then like these total 92 ships that are in this figure there, or gets even with the construction ships to over 100 ships against half as many French, that would have been a disaster if Spain didn't join. And if Spain doesn't join, France loses. And if France loses, Spain is in trouble. That's the only thing, because then they're alone against the only other naval power. So that's a bit of a predicament for Spain. So
what is the in summary, what is the impact of Benjamin Franklin? I know from the American perspective, how we're taught this version of history is that Benjamin Franklin goes over there, wears a coonskin hat, and just talks his way in, and the French they love him, and they're like, yeah, we'll support you guys. That's obviously a very, very generic, but like we're taught as Americans that Benjamin Franklin's silver tongue basically talked the French into it. You've already talked about how the French have other reasons on top of, but what's your opinion of Benjamin Franklin's importance?
So I think he's actually not important at all, because as I've explained since because not at this point, because Vergennes is basically, since he has defeated Turgot in this court intrigue battle, he is on this warpath. He has to go to war, because if he doesn't, he cannot achieve his primary war goals, which are depriving the British of the monopoly of the trade, which is securing a trade rights in America himself, which is also preventing a separate peace from the Americans with the British. He cannot achieve this without going to war. So he has to go to war at this point. And it doesn't matter if Saratoga gets won or not. It doesn't matter if Franklin is there or not. It's just the math of the thing. So it's just the math of power. You have 66 ships versus 56 ships. We go in. That's what it is. So
So
or as Jonathan Ardal has actually put it like that. He's put it like that: the Americans were at the right time, right place in the right time. that's what they did.
Well, I'm glad that it worked out for us in the end. That story's always kind of just confused me, just because it just doesn't seem to check out. Just Benjamin Franklin goes over there and talks to people and parties, and then the French were like, "Yeah, we'll throw everything away." But now that you've added context, that really helps. So 1778, the Treaty of Amenity is signed in the winter of February. What is the final? What we got here on the outline, I want to make sure I'm keeping up with you, is what is the final Gulf of Tonkin moment for Vergennes, and what starts the hostilities? Unless you want to cover some other PC before that.
So yeah, the war, I mean, that's because we wanted to go to when the war actually starts. So when the war starts, the French sent their Mediterranean Navy out of the Med. They try to get it to America to destroy the British Navy that's in front of New York. They get followed by a British Navy that cannot engage them yet because they want the French to fire the first shot so they can be the good guys diplomatically, and because they're still banking on other European powers condemning the French, and so the French are the bad guys. So basically they don't want to shoot. And there's a big 30 ship of the line fleet at Brest that sets out with a couple of frigates. So frigates are these smaller men-of-wars that are kind of for reconnaissance and for commerce raiding. This frigate goes out in the channel. It's the Belle Poule. And so Admiral Augustus Keppel, who commands the guard fleet during that time, he basically wants this frigate to salute him, which is standard practice. But madly enough, he has much more firepower. He has one ship of the line and 2 more frigates, so he's much more powerful. And this guy in the Belle Poule has only himself and a smaller frigate that's also happened to be nearby, and he refuses the signal. So he refuses to grant the honor of the salute to Admiral Augustus Keppel. And of course, this goes very poorly for him. There is a battle in summer, and yeah, the French get shot up badly, so they lose 40. The Belle Poule loses 40% of her crew, but miraculously manages to escape. This other frigate gets captured by the British, and this is perfect for Vergennes. So now he has they have fired the first shot. They're the bad guys. We can go fighting now. So that's basically summer of 1778 is when bullets start flying, basically. So yeah.
And we'll be covering all the French involvement in the war in upcoming shows as well. We've already talked about this, but so basically France ends. They get shot at first. You can now justify taking the nation to war. They've already signed that. So they've signed the Treaty of Amity or Amity 4 months prior, but I didn't realize that they didn't immediately start going to war. They're still waiting for the British to attack them so they can get justified. Okay. I mean, that's basically going to cover the what we want to cover in today's live stream. This is just kind of a run up. So we have some final questions. If anyone has any questions out there in the chat, just let them out, and then we can always come back on the next live stream and cover questions from this one as well. But we'll start closing this one out. So once France enters the war, how does the conflict change quickly?
So it changes massively. So it is, before that point, it's more of a low-level conflict. Also, on how you see the British actually dealing with the American Revolution, they don't really see it as a full-blown war. Also, you see this with Howe's behavior after the Battle of Long Island, that he kind of hesitates killing the army of George Washington. So they kind of want to have a soft war, a war of hearts and minds. That kind of changes, obviously, because they are now, the Americans, or previously Englishmen, are teaming up with Britain's arch enemy, and also the war strategies change massively. So there's now a Caribbean front to this war, there's an Indian front to this war, there's a European front to this war, because obviously the French have a big 30 ship of the line navy in the Channel threatening Britain herself. So changes massively. So yeah, but I think with the nitty-gritty of that, we can get into that in other shows. But yeah,
absolutely, I can't wait. And then we'll just do these closing ones. if France doesn't reform after 1763, do you think it still intervened?
So yeah, the Navy gets, as we've spoken already, the Army gets reformed, but the Army is really a second thought, like the Army in this war, because the Navy is more important. It's about keeping these routes open. It's about that, so basically. And as I said, like the Navy doesn't get transformed tremendously. So yeah, what they don't actually reform, as I've explained already, is the economy, which actually is the biggest problem, and which actually threatens the American monarchy in the French monarchy in the end of the war substantially. So they nearly go broke at the end of the war. So does Spain, and this is the biggest problem of reform, really, when talking about that.
Yeah, there's so much. And then we've already kind of talked about if France doesn't intervene, does America win? You want to come down heavy on the side of that?
Yeah, I would say. Yeah, I kind of alluded to that at the start already. I don't think they would. So in alternate 1779, where that's the year when Spain and France are in the war, and the war becomes much more global, with the Siege of Gibraltar, which is actually the biggest battle of the American Revolution. So Siege of Gibraltar. That all happens. Without that, during that time, up to 80,000 British and British allied troops are active on the globe. So you have, obviously, we have Hessians from where I'm from Hessen. We have Brunswickers, we have British troops, we have also Hanoverian troops, which get sent to Gibraltar and to India. These troops would all, in this alternate universe where Spain and France don't intervene, would go attack the United States. And during that time, the American army is about 15 to 20,000 regulars and a varying number of militiamen of questionable quality. And all of these armies bearing down on Washington, and that would certainly have decided the military aspect of this conflict. I don't know if the political aspect of this conflict would have been, yeah, we just revert to the status quo before the war. I don't think that would have been possible at this point. I think there would have been some sort of compromise, even if the British win. So politically, I wouldn't say the British could win at this point, but militarily, absolutely. And even with the intervention of France and Spain, a lot of these battles actually go the British's way. So they win a lot of naval battles. They win a lot of land battles also. And I don't see how the Americans stand alone in this, especially with this uneven numbers thing. So.
Oh, I absolutely agree. The United States doesn't happen without the French and the Spanish, specifically the French, I would argue. I don't know.
Because
they.
I would agree. I mean, you've kind of said that some people on Instagram were messaging you that the Spanish did much more than the French.
I get it in the comment section. They'll pop up, and it is fair. I need to read more into it, but there is an argument that I hear from the Spanish side that says the Spanish did more than the French. Surprisingly, I don't really hear too much from the French saying they did enough. I just know they did. But yeah, there's some, and I love it. I love all the comments that I can have, especially when people are arguing about 1780s. I'll take it, but yeah.
So yeah,
there's some pretty patriotic Spaniards out there.
Yeah, the Spanish actually, they contribute a lot materially. Yes, they do, and they fight a lot of battles. As I said, like the biggest battle of the entire war, they fight. But the political will comes from the French. So the Americans send a commissioner there to Madrid to also negotiate with the Spanish, and also do the British to negotiate, kind of sort of have a channel of diplomacy. This guy called Cumberland. And he gets, like, this Cumberland guy, this British guy, gets treated like a guest of honor. He gets all the honors of a diplomat, and the American guy gets kind of thrown out the door. So you kind of see the attitude the Spanish have towards America. they contribute a lot, like materially and also with the battles, and also bleed a lot for this war. But it's ultimately a war they want the British to win, and it's difficult. Like that, I'd say why the French contribution is more important than the Spanish one, I would say, is not because they contribute more materially or win or fight more battles, because they maybe don't, but they bring the political will to make an American nation happen. They do. The Spanish absolutely don't. They hate that idea. So, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to have one of the premier powers on your side, and it's just it's interesting to see like how this history is. You can see it through until today, right? The importance of escalation, people not wanting to go to war, the economy, the stock market, the trade, just different ways in which you're now escalating out, and people are like, is this even worth it? We're already on this track, we can't get off. It's just something for all of us to kind of dwell about. But that is not where we want. I don't want to take this anywhere towards that. So the final, so France, in conclusion, I'll kind of say what we have here on our outline. France didn't enter the war to create the United States as much as it entered to defeat Britain, and in doing so made American independence possible. All right, Luca, Seminole War also, thanks for the comment. We've done live streams with him before. He's a Florida historian, so we've talked about the importance of Spain in the American Revolution. Come back on, Seminole. We'll have another video. But Luca, if you want to close us out, yeah, we'll do your closeout, your final shout out, and we'll call this one a day.
So yeah, just in summary, the whole plan to go to war with Britain was premeditated by Vergennes, and it's basically his decisions and this court drama that happens at the court at Versailles that makes the American nation possible. And yeah, I think that's the TLDR of this whole thing. Maybe it also is a lesson about how this war is an absolute disaster for France, and France is actually the biggest loser of this war by racking up this much debt and falling into a revolution and then 25 years of catastrophic war. That's, yeah, maybe it's also a lesson that maybe building up economies, kind of the peaceful path of politicking is perhaps the stronger path, because if you look at Vergennes' war path, didn't bring France that much. So yeah, maybe that's the takeaway from this. So yeah, war is always the destruction of the property of the people, and that's it.
Man, they're not cheap. All right. Well, thank you so much, Luca Kaiser, again, from Kaiser's History, a great YouTube channel. If you are subscribing to my channel, watch my content, please go over to his channel, support his channel. His videos are amazing. They're way better than anything I ever put out. I love how much you've made a whole,
Thanks,
like a 30-minute video covering this with the graphics and basically covering everything that we did today in high quality, man. It's good stuff, and I can't wait to have you back on. And we'll cover more of the involvement of France in the American Revolution and just more of the revolutionary experience. It's interesting
Absolutely.
that because you're from Hesse Castle, or I guess is it just Hesse now? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm from the state of Hesse. But it's much bigger than the historical Hessen-Kassel. So Hessen-Kassel just used to be the area around Kassel. There's also Hessen-Darmstadt area around Darmstadt. So it's a myriad of little princedoms. So technically, I wouldn't be from that specific princedom of Hessen-Kassel, but I mean, I kind of still feel connected to this kind of history of the Hessians, and I also reenact as them once a year. I would also maybe one day come over to America to take part as a Hessian there, as a real Hessian myself.
We can get you on a Riviera 311 musket video. We can make that happen. Absolutely.
Thanks, man.
Throw some range. But yeah, again, thanks for watching, everybody. Again, please go like, comment, subscribe to his channel as well. And yeah,
so
this
any
will
questions?
be closing out this episode. Looks like yeah, it's pretty quiet on the questions front. Probably just timing. It's an early Saturday or Sunday. I don't even know what day it is, but any questions that we do have, we can always come back into the next one. And with that, we will end this episode of Cartridges and Casings. Take care.